Hello everyone, this is Naerina from 40k Theories, and welcome to this new episode of 40k Lore for Newcomers. For this episode, nominated on Patreon by Terrorblades, we will be taking a brief look at the Lamenters chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. This video will be a brief overview for certain events that may be explored in greater depth within additional videos within the future. So, without further ado, let's begin.
For those we cherish, we die in glory!
The Lamenters are a loyalist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, descended from the honored and highly revered Blood Angels Legion. Like other Space Marines, each and every battle brother of the Lamenters is a genetically augmented transhuman super soldier, sporting a size, strength and resilience far exceeding that of a baseline human. Despite being proud and noble defenders of the Imperium for much of their history, the chapter's name is a woefully appropriate one, for the Lamenters have experienced much grief and sorrow over the millennia. While initially envied by their fellow Blood Angel successor chapters for displaying little to no signs of flaws that manifest within Sanguinian gene seed, the Lamenters would come to be pitied by many due to their frequent misfortune. This would even lead to the Lamenters being shunned and spurned by others, resulting in bonds of friendship and brotherhood becoming a luxury rarely experienced by the chapter. Yet it was partly because of the few bonds of friendship that the chapter did have which resulted in the Lamenters being drawn into a long and bloody conflict against the Imperium itself. Despite this, the Lamenters would eventually be offered the Emperor's forgiveness, and to this day, the Lamenters seek to atone for the mistakes and heresies that were born out of arrogance and naivete.
From blood born to blood evermore consigned.
The Lamenters chapter would be established sometime around early M36 as a part of the 21st or Cursed Founding. This particular founding would become known as the Cursed Founding due to the fact that many of the chapters created during it would go on to display a number of genetic flaws or otherwise excessive abnormalities. This would prove to be highly ironic in hindsight, as the intended purpose of this particular founding was to eliminate the various flaws that exist within Space Marine gene seed. While a number of their fellow Cursed Founding chapters, such as the Black Dragons or the Sons of Antaeus, sported glaring physical deformities, the Lamenters, by contrast, appear to be relatively pure and untainted. As some of the more wayward and corrupted chapters of the Cursed Founding risked conflict over their very right to exist, the Lamenters would journey to the western fringes of the galaxy. Using their mobility as a fleet-based chapter, they would conduct a series of xenocidal campaigns against the Orcs, Eldari, and other inhuman races, a task that they would perform diligently for over a millennia. The Lamenters' crusade would be interrupted by order of the High Lords of Terra, who would recall the chapter to Segmentum Obscurus. The summons was made in order to reinforce Imperial defenders against an ever-increasing number of traitor legion incursions that were emerging from the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror. This would lead to the Lamenters fighting alongside the Mortifactors chapter during the Battle of Corellia. However, the highly superstitious Mortifactors would choose to abandon their allies during the course of a battle, refusing to associate, let alone battle alongside with a chapter that was supposedly cursed and haunted by ill fortune. Despite this turn of events, the Lamenters vowed to continue fighting in the world's defense, holding out for over 6 weeks against traitor legion forces, although they would suffer horrendous casualties as a result. Thankfully for the Lamenters, reinforcements from the Ultramarines and White Scars would eventually break through the traitor blockade, eventually securing a victory for the Imperium. Despite having been deployed at full chapter strength, only 200 Lamenters would survive the conflict. After departing from Corellia, the remainder of the Lamenters fleet would become caught within a devastating warp storm and would be declared lost to the Imperium. In a rare turn of events, however, the surviving Lamenters would successfully translate back into real space along the borders of Segmentum Solar after battling their way through the outer void for over a century. After slowly but surely replenishing their losses and rebuilding their fleet, the Lamenters would embark on another crusade, this time within close proximity to the galactic core. By the middle years of M41, the Lamenters, along with the Astral Claws, Mantis Warriors, and Charnel Guard would be reassigned by the High Lords of Terra to watch over the warp space rift, known as the Maelstrom. This group of chapters became something of a brotherhood known as the Maelstrom Warders, although the Charnel Guard would eventually be recalled to participate in the Thanatos Crusade. Little did the Lamenters realize, however, that the bonds of friendship and brotherhood forged with the other Maelstrom chapters would result in even greater misfortune befalling them.
Where there is uncertainty, I shall bring light. Where there is doubt, I shall sow faith. Where there is shame, I shall point atonement. Where there is rage, I shall show its course. My word in the soul shall be as my bolter in the field.
While the Lamenters are a relatively young chapter, their service record for much of their existence has been nothing less than exemplary. However, the chapter's streak of ill fortune would arguably reach its peak following the onset of the Badab War. In late M41, Luft Huron, the chapter master of the Astral Claws, annexed the entire Badab sector for himself, declaring himself the tyrant of Badab in the process. Huron also withheld various tithes from the Imperium and would open fire upon the fleet that had been sent to collect what was owed to the High Lords. While such an action would understandably be regarded as treasonous, Huron would maintain his innocence, claiming that the Tithe fleet had threatened him and his world with violence and that he was merely defending himself and his people. Believing that the Astartes within the Maelstrom zone were being persecuted, Huron would convene a conclave with the other Maelstrom Warder chapters, Lamenters included. There he revealed that he intended to have the region effectively secede from the neighboring sectors of Imperial space. The Tyrant of Badab would go on to explain that the Adeptus Astartes as an organization predated both the Administratum and the High Lords of Terra themselves, placing them beyond the concerns of such institutions, and that the Maelstrom Warders would continue performing their solemn duty in defending the Imperium from any threats that emerged from the Maelstrom. The Lamenters would agree to Huron's proposal, as they too believed that the attack made against the Astral Claws was a challenge to the very independence and autonomy of the Astartes. Despite the Lamenters, Astral Claws, and the Mantis Warriors maintaining their vigil over the Maelstrom, tensions would continue growing between them and the Imperium for a number of years. In 904 M41, following a hostile incident between the Mantis Warriors and the Loyalist Firehawks chapter, full-scale war would erupt between those loyal to the Imperium and those that pledged themselves to the Tyrant of Badab. While the other secessionist chapters would battle fiercely against the Loyalists, the Lamenters by contrast were reported to be fairly reluctant combatants during the course of this conflict, known as the Badab War. This was most notably demonstrated when the Lamenters refused to open fire upon the Marines' errant chapter, who the Lamenters had forged bonds of honor with over 200 years earlier, and instead sought to drive off the Loyalists through other means. Eventually, the Lamenters would be removed from the conflict following a devastating ambush launched by the Minotaur's chapter, resulting in many other chapters' warriors being slain or grievously injured. In the aftermath of the conflict, it would be decided that while the Lamenters were guilty of heresy, their crimes, which had been committed more out of naivete as opposed to a general desire to rebel, were not considered irredeemable. The chapter would be offered a chance to atone for their sins, subject to undertaking a century-long crusade of penitence. As part of said crusade, they would be charged with bringing the Emperor's wrath to the enemies of man, though they would be forbidden from replenishing any battlefield losses during this time. Unfortunately for the Lamenters, the chapter would encounter the forces of High Fleet Kraken during the course of this crusade. While the Lamenters would sustain heavy losses against the Tyranids, their selfless actions would ensure that many civilian transport vessels would evacuate to safety, making these warriors true heroes of the Imperium.
Let the repentant enjoy a merciful end.
For much of their existence, the Lamenters appear to be the sole Blood Angel successor chapter to be untouched by the flaws found within the Sanguinian gene seed, the Black Rage and the Red Thirst. Because of this, the company structure of the Lamenters mostly follows the tenets laid out within the Codex Astartes, although the chapter itself would still bear many of the hallmarks found within other Blood Angel successor chapters, such as the existence of the Sanguinary Priesthood, who fulfill the role of Chapter Apothecarian. The major exception in this regard, though, is that the chief apothecary of the Lamenters is known by the title of Calyx, with some referring to the entire Apothecarian as the Calyx Priesthood. However, in the more recent years, many of the chapter's warriors would begin succumbing to the effects of the Black Rage, necessitating the creation of a death company. Those that succumb to the Black Rage, suffering extreme hallucinations, believing themselves to be their Primarch Sanguinius during the final hours of the Horus Heresy. Such warriors will become little more than rampaging berserkers upon the battlefield, as their strength and threshold for pain becomes boosted to nigh unprecedented levels, allowing them to not only tear their enemies apart with brutal efficiency, but also continue fighting despite sustaining wounds that would normally fell a Space Marine. Those that fall to the Black Rage are for all intents and purposes uncontrollable, and only the chapter's chaplains hold any sort of influence of these warriors, resulting in the chaplaincy leading the death company upon the field of battle. The Red Thirst is another flaw that has begun to manifest within the ranks of the Lamenters in recent years, instilling those affected with an unnatural craving for blood. An additional, yet seemingly unique physiological flaw would also become present within Lamenters' gene seed, resulting in the chapter's warriors to frequently demonstrate a deeply melancholic disposition. In response to the frequent calamity and misfortune that the chapter's warriors have experienced, however, each and every battle brother of the Lamenters has learned to become highly self-sufficient, flexible, and pragmatic. This, by extension, has rendered the Lamenters into a surprisingly adaptable force in combat, allowing them to compensate for the many unexpected situations that will inevitably occur upon the battlefield. And that concludes this edition of 40k Lore for Newcomers. If you like this video, consider supporting us on Patreon for more content. To those who are new to 40k, we hope you learned something. So, leave a comment below. And thanks for watching.